Hi, this video will discuss interval notation. Alright, when we turn our attention to inequalities, we no longer end up with a solution that looks like x equals 7. Alright, what we end up with is a whole group of solutions. So for example, we might say x is greater than or equal to 1 and less than 7. Okay, and what that means is that every value, including 1, up to 7, but not including 7, is a solution. So 1 would be a solution, 2, 3.5, 4.6, okay? All the way up to 7, okay? Any of these values are solution. So when we come up with these complicated solutions that are no longer just one value, we want to come up with a shorthand to help us write what our solution is. So what we use is interval notation, and you might see it written like this, or like this, or some combination thereof, like round on one side, square on the other, okay? The main thing to realize is that this is not a point. This is not a point on the Cartesian plane, okay? This isn't an XY point. When we turn our attention to interval notation, this means every point between 2 and 3. I wrote that backwards, sorry. Every point between 2 and 3 could be a solution, okay? It's not a point that we go out and graph. No. What it's telling us is that more in the terms of just the number line, and that every value between 2 and 3 could potentially be a solution, okay? So we use open brackets in interval notation, okay? Those are our rounded brackets as shown here, open brackets. And we use those when our endpoints are not included in the solution. In other words, there's no equal sign. Here I have an equal sign, so I wouldn't use an open bracket. No equal sign, I use an open bracket or a rounded bracket. And I'll give you an example in a second. We use square brackets, or what we call closed brackets, when we want to include our endpoints. In other words, there is an equal sign. Okay? The fourth point I want to make is that if we go off in infinity, all right, if we go off, say, less than -1, we go off to values in this direction, we end up at what we call negative infinity. Okay? If we go off into the right or off to positive values, we end up at what we call positive infinity. Okay? And this is just math notation saying that this is the largest number there can ever be. This is the smallest number there can ever be. There's just one caveat to that. Numbers go on for forever. And that's what the sideways 8, we call it infinity, means. Numbers go off for forever. Okay? And so we have to have a way of denoting that. When numbers go off to forever in the positive direction, we have positive infinity. When numbers go off for forever in the negative direction, we have negative infinity. Because numbers can never stop, we never use a closed bracket with infinity. So if we write all positive numbers, we write negative infinity, positive infinity, okay? And we always use an open bracket with those. In other words, always a rounded bracket when we have our infinity. And now the way we do, let's go back to our original example. All right. The way we do it is we write the smallest number that x can ever take on. In this case, it would be 1, comma, the largest number x can ever take on, which is 7. And then we decide if we want open or closed brackets. Equal sign, closed bracket, closed or square bracket. No equal sign, open bracket. Okay? So that's how we write something in interval notation. And so now here I have 3 examples. To begin with, it's probably easier to see as if we draw a number line. Okay, so 0, -1, -2, -3. Okay? So if we were asked for our x values, x is less than -3. Remember, less than sign is going off in this direction. Okay? So this means that it goes off for forever in this direction, and we would eventually get to our negative infinity. So now let's write our interval notation for this first one. What is the smallest value x will ever take on? Well, it actually happens to be negative infinity. And remember, I'm going to always use an open bracket for that. What is the largest value x could ever take on? Well, the largest value is right here, negative 3. No equal sign, so I'm going to use an open bracket or rounded bracket. And that's how we write this answer in interval notation. Negative infinity to negative 3, open brackets. Let's try another one. If we say greater than 5, positive infinity on this end, negative infinity on this end. Let's do 0, 5, 10, 15. Okay, so it's greater than 5. It's going to start at 5 and go off for forever in this direction. So to write this in interval notation, what's the smallest value x will ever take on? 5. What's the largest value x will ever take on? Infinity. I want to use an open bracket with my 5 because there's no equal sign, so it's going to be rounded. And I'm going to use a rounded bracket with infinity. Remember, rule number 5, always use a rounded bracket with infinity and negative infinity. And now let's try the last example. This is probably the easiest. The smallest value x will ever take on, negative 7. The largest value x will ever take on, positive 3. Okay? And now, equal sign associated with the negative 7, so closed bracket. No equal sign associated with the 3, so open bracket. So that is how we do interval notation. I hope this helps. If you have questions, please let me know.